She wasn't attacking me, Daddy, Amara cried, her voice cutting through the tension. Look at the wall. She was teaching me. She is the one. The king looked at the wall. Then he looked at the girl. He realized the truth instantly. The genius was not in the classroom. The genius was in the gutter. King Ade looked down at his 10 million naira agbana. He looked at the sewage-soaked mud where Adira lay. He walked past the trembling headmistress. He stood over Adira. You taught my daughter what I could not? He asked, his voice strangely soft. Adira flinched, curling into a ball, expecting the cane. Instead, the king reached up and did the unthinkable. He took off his crown. He handed the symbol of his power to his shocked guard. Then, to the horror of the hundreds watching, the billionaire king dropped to his knees. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the courtyard. Ha! The king! He didn't care about the mud soaking into the silk. He didn't care about the flies. He reached out and pulled the shivering, smelling girl into his chest, wrapping the expansive white wings of his agbada around her rags, covering her shame, pulling her filth against his royal heart. The world sees dirt, he whispered into her ear, loud enough for the wind to carry. I see gold. 3 weeks earlier, you are probably wondering how a girl who eats from the dust ended up wrapped in the robes of a king. They say royalty and rats don't mix. They say oil and water don't blend. But they never told you what happens when the rat is the only one who knows the truth. To understand the glory, you must first taste the gutter. 3 weeks before the mud and the miracle, the sun rose over Lagos, illuminating two very different worlds. In the Golden District, King Ade stood in a bathroom larger than most houses. He was a man surrounded by people, yet entirely alone. Servants dressed him in silence, draping the heavy fabrics over his shoulders, adjusting the crown on his head. He sprayed cologne that smelled of oud and ancient money. He looked in the mirror and saw a powerful man, but his eyes were tired. He checked his phone and a notification flashed. Princess Amara, math tutor, resigned. He sighed, the weight of his empire feeling lighter than the burden of his daughter's failure. Miles away, in the shadow of the city's largest refuse dump, Adira woke up inside the rusted chassis of an abandoned car. Her morning alarm was the sharp pain of an empty stomach. She coughed, a dry hacking sound that rattled her thin ribs. She smelled her own shirt and winced. It reeked of 3-day-old garbage and sweat. She stepped out into the smoking dump, swatting flies away from her face. She wasn't dressing for power. She was dressing for survival. That afternoon, Adira dragged her sack of scavenged bottles toward the back fence of the Royal College. This spot, hidden behind a large hibiscus bush, was her library. It was the only place where she could hear the teachers' voices drifting from the open windows. Through the wire mesh of the fence, she saw Princess Amara sitting alone on a marble bench. The princess had her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking. A math textbook lay open on the grass, the pages fluttering in the wind. I don't understand, Amara wept softly. I'm just stupid. Everyone says I'm stupid. Adira watched from the shadows. She knew the rules of the street. Keep moving, stay invisible. If she was seen, she would be beaten. But Adira had a weakness greater than hunger. She could not stand to see a problem unsolved. It was an itch in her brain that demanded to be scratched. She picked a twig. She began to write the solution in the dirt on her side of the fence, mouthing the number silently. Suddenly, a shadow fell over the princess. Mrs. Kalu, the headmistress, marched into view. She loomed over the weeping girl like a vulture. Crying again, princess, Mrs. Kalu sneered. If your father knew you are wasting his money to fail simple algebra, he would die of shame. You are an embarrassment to the crown. Amara shrank back, making herself small. Mrs. Kalu paused. She sniffed the air, her face wrinkling. Ugh, what is that smell? Is it you, princess, or have you been rolling in the dirt like an animal? The headmistress looked around, her eyes scanning the perimeter. She spotted the hibiscus bush shaking. She marched to the fence and peered through the wire. There she saw Adira freezing in terror. Aha, Mrs. Kalu said, covering her nose with a perfumed handkerchief. The rat returns. She looked to her left where a cleaner had left a bucket of grey soapy mop water, heavy with bleach and chemical cleaners. Let me help you bathe, animal, Mrs. Kalu said with a cruel smile. She lifted the bucket and hurled the contents through the fence. Splash! The dirty, chemical-filled water hit Adira full in the face. It soaked her rags, stung her eyes, and dripped into her mouth. The humiliation was colder than the water. Adira gasped, blindly wiping the sting from her eyes. "Now, run along," Mrs. Kalu laughed, dusting her hands, "before I call the dogs." She walked away, dragging the sobbing Amara back toward the classrooms. Adira stood there, soaked, shivering, smelling worse than before. The chemicals burned her skin. Every instinct told her to run, to hide, to disappear back into the trash where she belonged. But she didn't run. She looked at the math book Amara had left on the bench. She looked at the problem that made the princess cry. Solve for X. Adira picked a small stone. She threw it gently through the fence. Twack! It hit the open book. Amara turned back, startled. She looked at the fence. Adira was still there, gripping the wire with dirty fingers, water dripping from her nose. "The answer isn't 0, princess," Adira whispered, her voice raspy but steady. "The answer is infinity." Amara froze. She wiped her eyes and walked slowly back to the fence. The smell of the mop water and garbage hit her, but the curiosity hit her harder. "Who are you?" Amara asked, staring at the girl who refused to break. Adira offered a sad, crooked smile. "I am nobody, but I can teach you how to be somebody." For 2 weeks, the rusted wire fence behind the Royal College became a confessional, a classroom, and a lifeline. The dynamic had shifted. It was no longer just about math. The cement bag notebook, sewn together with rusted wire and determination, was filling up. On one page, complex algebraic formulas written in charcoal. On the next, crude drawings of the solar system. Adira was feeding Princess Amara's mind, and in return, Amara was feeding Adira's body. Every afternoon, the princess would sneak half her lunch, jollof rice wrapped in foil, a piece of chicken, sometimes a cold bottle of Fanta through the hole in the fence. "You eat too fast," Amara whispered one Tuesday, watching Adira inhale the rice with trembling hands. "I eat for yesterday and tomorrow," Adira replied, wiping oil from her mouth with the back of a scarred hand. "In my world, today is a luxury." But while Amara's mind grew sharper, the atmosphere inside the school grew darker. Mrs. Kalu, the headmistress, was prowling. She sensed the change. The princess, who usually walked with her head down, now walked with a strange, quiet confidence. When teachers asked questions, Amara didn't stutter. She answered. This was dangerous for Mrs. Kalu. Adira, ever the observer, noticed it first. From her vantage point in the trash heap, she saw things no one else saw. She saw the way Mrs. Kalu intercepted the king's letters to his daughter. She saw the way the headmistress smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes, whenever the king's personal assistant delivered the monthly special tuition checks. The discovery happened on a Thursday. It was garbage day. Adira was doing her round at the school's rare disposal unit, sorting through the waste of the privileged. She ripped open a black bag from the administrative office. The smell of stale coffee and shredded paper hit her, but something else caught her eye. It was a test paper, Amara's test paper. Adira smoothed out the crumpled sheet. It was the midterm mathematics assessment. They had studied for this all week. Adira had taught Amara the quadratic formula using stones and sticks until the princess could recite it in her sleep. Adira scanned the answers. Correct, correct, correct. But at the top of the page, in thick red ink, Mrs. Kalu had written 20%. Failed. See me for remedial fees. Adira's heart hammered against her ribs. She dug deeper into the bag. She found a draft letter addressed to King Ade. Your Highness, it breaks my heart to report that Princess Amara's mental capacity is regressing. She requires isolation and intensive paid therapy. I recommend we cut off her communication with the outside world to help her focus. It wasn't just theft, it was an erasure. Mrs. Kalu was gaslighting the king to keep the money flowing, and she was willing to destroy a child's confidence to do it. Adira looked at the school building. The king was scheduled to visit today for the parents' open day. She knew she couldn't give this to Amara. The princess was too soft. She would cry and get caught. Adira had to do it herself. The king's convoy arrived at 2 p.m. The ground shook as the heavy SUVs rolled onto the gravel. Adira watched from the bushes, clutching the crumpled test paper and the cement bag notebook to her chest. She needed the king to see the truth. She needed him to see that his daughter wasn't stupid. She was being sabotaged. She knew the layout. The drivers would wait by the cars while the king went into the assembly hall. If she could just slip the evidence onto the seat of his Rolls Royce. Adira took a breath. She smelled of the bin, but her spirit felt clean. She crawled. She moved on her stomach through the drainage ditch that ran parallel to the parking lot. The mud was thick and black, coating her arms, camouflaging her against the shadows. She reached the edge of the lot. The drivers were distracted, laughing and smoking cigarettes by the gatehouse. Adira sprinted. She was a ghost in rags, silent and swift. She reached the king's phantom. The back window was cracked open an inch to let out the heat. She reached into her pocket for the crumpled test paper. Her fingers touched the cool glass. So, the rat thinks it can drive? The voice froze her blood. Adira spun around. Mrs. Kalu was standing there. She wasn't smiling. Behind her stood 2 security guards, their batons already drawn. I found this, Adira stammered, holding up the test paper. You failed her. She passed, but you failed her. Mrs. Kalu's eyes flicked to the paper. She didn't panic. She didn't flinch. She stepped forward and snatched the paper from Adira's dirty hand. You found nothing, Mrs. Kalu hissed. She crumpled the paper and shoved it into her pocket. Then she looked at the guards. Hold her. The guards grabbed Adira by her thin arms. She struggled, kicking and biting, but she was malnourished and weak. They dragged her toward the assembly hall entrance just as the double doors swung open. King Ade walked out, flanked by his entourage. He looked exhausted. He was adjusting his agbada, listening to an aide whisper about stock prices. Your Highness, Mrs. Kalu shouted, her voice suddenly shifting from venom to panic. Thank God you are coming out. We caught her. We caught the thief. The king stopped. He looked up and saw Adira, dangling between the guards like a caught animal covered in fresh mud from the ditch. Thief? The king's brow furrowed. Who is this child? She is the one, Your Highness, Mrs. Kalu said, panting as if she had run a marathon. For weeks, items have been missing, money from the staff room, lunches, but today is worse. Mrs. Kalu reached into Adira's other hand and ripped the cement bag notebook away. I found this on her, Mrs. Kalu announced, holding the dirty object up like a piece of evidence in a murder trial. No, Adira screamed, her voice raw. I wanted to show him the test. King Ade looked at Adira. He didn't see a savior. He saw a dirty street child who had trespassed on private property. But he was a fair man. Let me see the book, the king said. Mrs. Kalu hesitated for a fraction of a second, then handed it over. Be careful, sir. It is filthy. The king took the notebook. He opened it. He saw the charcoal equations. He saw the drawings. What is this? He asked. Mrs. Kalu stepped in, smooth as a viper. It is a cheat sheet, Your Highness. This street rat, she steals the exam answers from the trash and sells them to the students. That is why the princess's grades have been fluctuating. She had been buying answers from this beggar. The king's face hardened. He turned to the notebook again. It made sense. How else would his struggling daughter suddenly know advanced algebra? Adira felt the world collapsing. No, I taught her. You? Mrs. Kalu laughed, a cold, sharp sound. You cannot even write your own name, you dirty thing. You want the king to believe that you taught a princess? The king looked at Adira. He saw the desperation. He saw the poverty. And in his world, poverty often meant desperation, and desperation led to crime. Where is Amara? The king asked quietly. In class, sir, Kalu lied. I didn't want her to see this. She has such a kind heart. She gave this thief food, and look how she is repaid. Betrayal. The king closed the notebook. He dropped it into the dirt. It landed with a soft thud, the sound of a heart breaking. Get out of here, King Ade said, his voice devoid of emotion. If she comes near the fence again, arrest her. No, look at the test. Check your pocket, Adira screamed at Mrs. Kalu. But Mrs. Kalu just smiled, a terrifying, triumphant smile that only Adira could see. She leaned in close as the guards began to drag Adira away. You are nothing, Mrs. Kalu whispered. Go back to the bin before I bury you in it. The guards dragged Adira toward the gate. She dug her heels into the gravel, leaving 2 long furrows in the ground. She watched the king get into his car. She watched Mrs. Kalu pick up the cement bag notebook, her life's work, her proof of genius, and toss it casually into a nearby trash can. The heavy iron gate slammed shut in Adira's face. She was outside. The king was inside. The villain had won. Adira sat in the dust, the engine of the Rolls Royce fading in the distance. The sky turned grey, and the first drops of heavy rain began to fall, washing the mud from her skin, but unable to wash the defeat from her soul. She had tried to be a hero, but the world had reminded her that she was just a rat. The rain fell harder, turning the dust into a river of red mud. Adira lay there, the cold seeping into her bones. She should go home. She should crawl back to the rusted car chassis and let the darkness take her. But then, through the rhythmic pounding of the rain and the hum of the idling Rolls-Royce engine ending, she heard it. A scream, high-pitched, terrified and cut short. "Daddy, please listen!" And then the sharp and unmistakable crack of a cane striking flesh. Adira's head snapped up. The king hadn't left yet. His car was still sitting by the front porch, waiting for the heavy gates to open fully. Adira looked at her trembling hands. They were weak, scarred and useless. She looked at the towering iron gates topped with spikes that touched the sky. She looked at the guards who had turned their backs to light cigarettes, laughing at the rat they had just discarded. She knew if she climbed that fence, she would be caught. She knew if she went back in, Mrs. Carlo wouldn't just throw her out, she might kill her. Adira wiped the mud from her eyes. She took a breath that rattled in her chest like broken glass. She stood up. She wasn't going home. She was going back in. Adira gripped the cold iron bars. She began to climb.